Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point. We're back with another episode of the Magical Salon. I'm your visionary, Amanda, and I'm joined by
your writer, James.
Today we're talking about creativity. Where does the source of art come from, and what does it mean to tap into it? Is creativity a part of a spiritual practice? So to start us off here, why do you think there is a link, or is there a link, between creativity and spirituality?
Where does creativity come from? So when I was doing research, and just when you hear artists talking about their work, they're frequently like, I was a vessel, I was channeling a higher power. I don't know where these thoughts came from. I was just sitting at my desk typing, and then all of a sudden something came up. So I'm not sure. I don't know where do you think it comes from? You would classify yourself more as a creative than me, probably, especially for a longer period of time. So where does your creative inspiration come from? And why do you think there is an overlap to spirituality, or is there one, in your opinion?
I definitely think there is a connection between creativity and spirituality, kind of for a multitude of reasons, which I think we'll kind of get into here. But on the one hand, the whole idea of creating anything is kind of like manifesting in a way. It starts as an idea and then becomes a physical reality. But in this case, if it's art, you are making it a physical reality yourself. And then, of course, there's also like the connection between creativity and God. So there's like a direct parallel there with spirituality.
Something that came up in my creativity studies, and something I'm going to attempt to do, this 12-week program, I came across this book series called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And she got her start and claim to fame by being this coach that helps writers and creatives get out of blocks, as you might say. So she developed this program, and it's her idea of how to become more creative. And she kind of says anybody can be a creative. And it's simple on its face, but it does require effort. So she says she calls them morning pages. Every day you're supposed to wake up and longhand write out 3 pages. It could be about anything, like, oh, I forgot to call my mom. I have to do this presentation at work, or I have to go do this later, or, oh, I had a crazy dream. So it can be about anything. The point is to just vent your mind onto the page and then see what happens to get the juices flowing. Kind of automatic writing, which comes up in spirituality and stuff sometimes. Like, people will be channeling, or you just continue talking and writing whatever comes to your mind to try and kind of get out of self-censoring yourself, basically. So I just thought that was an interesting idea. And if you've ever done anything like that, or if you've heard of something like this, or done a program where you try and become more creative yourself personally.
I mean, I've heard of The Artist's Way. I am not really a big fan of rigid structure, especially after getting out of graduate school, because I think just sometimes too rigid of a structure inhibits my creativity, and I feel I can be more creative. However, I will say, with the caveat of I already have a developed creative practice, so if you didn't have that, then perhaps it might be useful to create a structure, and then at some point you may no longer need the structure because you're kind of in the habit of doing it. So, and I think that also is another parallel to spirituality. Both require a ongoing practice, and it doesn't always go perfectly according to plan every time you show up, whether for creativity or for spirituality. I mean, there's so many times that, like, the practice of writing in front of my computer, but that doesn't mean that I always write something that's good. And I think also you have to write a lot of bad stuff before you do even get to something good. And I think in some ways that's kind of like try to meditate and fail at meditating before you can get good at it. It's sort of like a lot of things, sort of just the routine of continuing to do it. And then in my creative writing experience, we did used to do free writes, they were called, where you would just sort of write for an allotted amount of time, either on a prompt or without one. And so in that way, it's kind of like morning pages, I would imagine.
I think the idea of them is cool because it's kind of, again, it's trying to override your self-censoring. And the way I've been interpreting it, and I think the way she kind of talks about it, you're not supposed to even worry about grammar or spelling. You're not supposed to be editing. You're not even supposed to be going back and rereading it. The point is not to be writing anything of substance. It's just to brain brain dump. It's to get your physical handwriting and your brain to just kind of spit stuff out without thinking about it, which is very hard to do, especially when you think of writing on a computer. It's now giving you auto suggestions. It's trying to prompt future words for you. They're trying to feed you words in your own piece. It's painted as something to help you, like, oh, you're most likely going to use this word next. So the idea of doing it on physical paper is like no interactions. It's just you and the page, which I find something kind of therapeutic or meditative about it, you could say. And I think it's an interesting way to kind of just get the juices flowing, I guess, the creative juices. And her whole thing is everybody is creative, whether they call themselves that or not.
Well, I feel like I might have mentioned this on a prior episode, but it seems fitting. When I first opened my new Lichtterm notebook, like it has a little pamphlet in the front where it says "Penser avec la main," thinking with the hand, which for me, that's what physical journaling is. And like at a certain point, your mind kind of goes away and you do sort of end up in a flow state where you're really in it. I don't know where you are, but you're not.
So getting away from the journal aspect a little bit, one thing that I did want to mention that I was thinking about relating to creativity as a practice, which I think is really what the morning pages are trying to get about. It's thinking differently, but it doesn't have to be, oh, I'm a creative person, so I sew or I paint. You could be creative in your morning commute to work. You don't have to drive the exact same way. And although that's silly, oh, I'm going to go left and just see where this road goes, which we were kind of talking about with your parents, just driving around aimlessly, not using GPS nowadays to get the fastest route. You're just kind of meandering around town. It's more creative and it kind of forces you outside of your routine, and then it makes you more present as well because you've never been on this road before. So you're paying more attention to the road. Not that you're not normally, but your kind of eyes are glazed over. You already have seen those landmarks a million times, so you don't pay attention to it quite the same way you do when it's a brand new road or you've never been in this area or it's a new state. So I just like the idea of you can be creative without needing to spend any money, and you can just embed it or work it into your current day and just do things slightly differently. It's little things.
I think that is good and probably does create a more creative mindset, but I don't know if I would say those are creative actions in and of themselves. But an easy low-hanging fruit activity is collaging, like because you don't need to buy anything. Anything can be collage. And that's why I love collage so much, because everything that you're looking at could potentially be art. So you're looking at everything with a new lens of how can I use this or juxtapose this against something else to create something meaningful. So everything sort of has a degree of wonder to it, which I think is the ideal artist way, in contrast to the idea of the struggling, tortured artist.
Well, on the struggling, tortured artist line, I think is interesting because the idea is people that are creative, they kind of live fast, die young. That's the way it's framed in media and stuff. Famous artists OD, or they're addicted to drinking, or they wrote this book and they were so hammered they don't even remember it, which I think Stephen King was like cocaine addict or drinker, and he claimed to not remember some of the books that he wrote. So the idea being, to be creative, you need these vices almost. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Why do people think they need a tool or a crutch or a medicine or a drug to allow them to be creative?
I don't think it's that you need the drug to be creative. I think you need the drug to alleviate suffering. And I think that it's very interesting in the concept of spirituality, because obviously, like in Buddhism, they obviously talk a lot about suffering. And it does seem to be true that people who are great artists, they tend to be more depressed as people. And I wonder if that has something to do with kind of what we've been talking about before, which is like if you see something that not everybody else is seeing, it can be very isolating. And I just feel like you're just going to be more depressed as a person in general rather than being more happy-go-lucky. But I guess why I mentioned it here is because I feel like if more artists could become more in tune with spirituality, I think it could help alleviate some of that feeling of suffering.
I'm not following. So artists are all suffering, so they turn to vice?
No, I mean, I feel like artists are typically more sensitive.
I don't know. I mean, in my mind, it's not about suffering. It's about Julia Cameron, I think, kind of talks about this some but she calls it a censor, or your shadow self, or self-doubting, or the little voice in your head where society tells you can't do it. Like, you can't be an artist. If you're an artist, you'll be a broke person or whatever. You'll be homeless, a starving artist, and poor. That's kind of internally, we are our own worst critics, basically, especially when it comes to being creative. And societally, you're not really encouraged to be that creative. We encourage it to an extent when you're a kid, but then it's always with the caveat that, well, it's nice, like, you're a kid, you like to draw or write stories or do this and that, but that's not realistic. That will be a hobby. You can't be an artist. You can't be a musician. You can't be a writer. So we say that we encourage creativity, but I kind of feel like that's not true in the society writ large. But I think that's why artists lean on drugs to some extent, because it kind of helps remove the filter, the societal filter that's kind of blocking you internally. Drinking is an easy example because people say it loosens them up, it helps them be more sociable. So maybe you're too self-conscious or afraid to write something or to say something. But hey, if I drink a lot, then the words just flow out of me. I have no censor. I can write anything. I think that maybe is where the connection to drugs comes in from a creating, especially writing and drinking is that's like a tale as old as time. Hemingway, you think of as being a drunk. Wasn't it Hemingway that was a drunk? Bukowski, they were all drinkers kind of. And Julia also claims that she was a cocaine addict at one point and drinking because that was how she was able to kind of...
I mean, I know what you're saying, but I don't think that's what the connection is. I think the connection is that artists are very depressed, so they turn to drinking and drugs in order to cope with that. And I think art, in a way, is a way of coping as well. What are this lady's credentials anyway? Like, has she ever created anything?
I mean, yeah, she wrote this book series. She was apparently married to Martin Scorsese, which I did not know. And she helped him write part of Taxi Driver or something, which is a very famous movie that came out in the 70s. She's around a lot of stuff. It's kind of almost Joan Didion-esque, where you kind of have heard of the name. Like, you'd heard of the book series that she wrote, but didn't know that much about her. So she's been around.
Well, yeah, I've heard of it. And this is my problem with all these kinds of things like this, is that it seems very similar to self-help books in a way. I don't like that aspect. And then it's also like everybody has written a book about writing a book, or like, for example, and some of these people like don't even have credentials. It's like, why would I take advice from you, a fellow nobody?
Same could be said about this podcast then, though. Why listen to this podcast? There's a million podcasts out there. But that shouldn't stop you from trying or being creative. Even though it already exists, you can still be creative, or you can still write a book with your own unique spin on it, and that might resonate in a different way. Even though, yes, the topic has been touched before, but you can put your own unique spin on it. Do you think creativity is something that you're just born with? Like, are people more creative? If you think of a Da Vinci or Steve Jobs, these people or Edison or Tesla, do you think people are born and they're really creative? And that guy, he's a square. He's an accountant. All he does is counts numbers. He can't think outside of the box. He's just going to wear the same outfit every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, are creative people higher on the map of consciousness? I feel like an argument could be made for that. Because, like, to your point, most people are so afraid or worried or fearful of failing, or they're just overthinking everything, that they're not even in touch enough with their own emotions to create an art piece of any kind, let alone for it to like actually be good and resonate with anyone, which is a different discussion entirely and is sort of outside creativity, I would say. Like, I feel like being an artist, you're like a trendsetter because you're not just abiding by the status quo. Like, a true artist experiments, pushes boundaries. So you're sort of doing things that other people shy away from and may just be recreating the traditional ways of doing it.
I would probably agree with that, but I think we're kind of blurring the lines here because we're crossing now, because we're talking about creativity, but you're kind of delving into artists. But I'm just saying creativity in general is for everybody. You don't need to be a creative creative person. Like, you are a creative person by virtue of being a person, basically. And you can be creative in your own life, whether that's making a slightly different recipe at dinner, or you open the fridge and you only have 5 random ingredients. What are you going to make with them? What kind of arrangement can you somehow make? Rather than, I'm just going to go to the store, buy a pre-made banquet meal, microwave it for 50 seconds. You can be creative at all times of your day and in your life, regardless of what you do as your profession. And I think that's kind of what you want to get to the point of, where you're always in a creative mindset and trying to have fun with your day-to-day life. You could turn a regular commute or run to the grocery store into an adventure. It doesn't have to be a chore and a slog that you're suffering through, to use your term earlier, where artists are suffering all the time.
But I mean, is that really creativity, or is that just being in the present moment and wu wei?
Well, I would ask you, what do you think? Is there a distinction? The more you think about it, when you are being creative, aren't you the most present? So then you want to be creative more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you can create anything without being present. So, and that's why I've always said, when I am creating something, that is when I feel like I'm wu-weiing. That is me at my most present. I guess, though, just like for the people, what is the value of being creative or touching creativity? Like, from your perspective, why do it?
By saying being creative forces you to be present, which we're getting at. Being creative is a different mindset. You're being more present. Your attention is focused in the moment of whatever you're doing. So when you're playing a sport, you could argue you're being creative because, like, if I think of soccer games or basketball, where it's a more free-flowing game, there's not, like football, you have a play that's called and you have a very specific route. You do X, that's what we called, so you do it. But in soccer, it's more ongoing. There's a flow of the game back and forth without breaks as much. So you kind of have to, where should I run? Is this guy going to go behind me, or is he going to cut in front of me? It's forcing you to be in the present, which is different than if you just lift weights, where you're rote doing something mindless. I think the value of creativity is being present.
But I guess what I'm saying is, what is the value of being creative specifically as a way of being present in the moment? Because there are other ways of being present in the moment. Sports, I would say, are one, because you have to be in it completely, like to a certain extent. Or like meditating, that's not creative in my mind, but that's being really present. What do you think the benefit is for creativity specifically? Or is there a benefit, or is it just like another access point?
I think there is a benefit, and I think it kind of going to magic and alchemy, being creative forces you, and even your example of collage, when you're in a creative mindset, you're looking around you. The world isn't just objects, it's things to be manipulated or changed, or you can fix something. Instead of looking at a blank wall and going, wow, my house is bland, you can look at that wall and go, oh, I actually saw this cute thing on Pinterest. I'm going to try and paint sunflowers on the wall now. It's your house. You can do it. Oh, you're renting an apartment? Who cares? You can still paint the wall and then just paint it white when you leave. It doesn't matter. And that's the thing. You are looking at the world as it is, but you're seeing how it could be. It's more active, and you're assisting the change that's going on around you, rather than just being pulled along in the current, maybe. It seems like you do think there's a difference to creativity versus art.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's probably just my elitism, like, coming through. I do think that everyone is creative. Like, I agree with that. But I also feel like people put this pressure on themselves. If they can't paint the Mona Lisa, they're not going to paint at all. If they can't write a magnum opus, they're not going to write at all. That's how a lot of people are. So I get why you don't want to make a lot of distinctions and stuff, because you're kind of trying to dissuade people who may be feeling like that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be... The symbol and message everywhere is, you aren't an artist. Why bother painting? You're not Picasso. That's crappy. But it's like, well, Picasso probably sucked at one point too, is what we're saying. You're not born a genius. You don't pick up a paintbrush and then paint Starry Night. You have to work at it. That's Van Gogh, I know. But I'm just saying, the idea is you have to put in the work. If you want to be an artist, you have to do the work. You have to be creative. But you are creative. That's what I'm saying. You're creative, but maybe you aren't giving yourself the opportunity to make the art, because you're self-doubting and shutting yourself off, so you don't even let yourself try and do it in the first place.
Well, and as I think I said in a prior episode, Van Gogh drew for pretty much his entire life and only started painting like a year or like 7 years before he died. Painting wasn't his forte, right? Which is crazy because he's known as a painter. And he like painted all these paintings in 7 years, which is incredible, honestly. I also just think that part of the other problem is like art gets tied up in validation. Like people sort of, I mean, obviously ego is involved, but you just sort of identify with your art because you put so much of yourself into it that when someone dares to criticize it, you know, you fall apart or whatever. Or it inhibits you because you can't just create and be free from that. Because if you could, then you would just be a lot more liberated, I think. Art doesn't have to be good. It just needs to be expressive. I just need to create things, in some ways, feel my emotions and put them out into the world. And how other people receive them is really not my problem.
Something that I'm thinking of is, you will know what I'm talking about. We went to some like poetry reading thing, but you could just sign up if you wanted. And you and I, like, we both had some crappy poems we could read. But think of how I'm saying this now that I'm saying it. I'm already putting our own stuff down. But then when you're sitting there at the reading, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I could do that. They're not even good. I'm better than that. But it's like, guess what? I didn't take the chance. So they believed in themselves more than me. I'm a nobody sitting here beating myself up because I never even tried and comparing myself, saying I'm better and doing this and that. But I never even put myself out there in the first place. So it's like, what leg do I have to stand on? And I think that's kind of what Julia Cameron way that she's trying to teach is getting at, is you're your own worst enemy when it comes to suppressing your own creativity, basically.
I mean, just think about being a kid. I had imaginary friends when I was a kid, which is like a mark of creativity because I've looked it up before. You know, like when you're a kid, you make everything talk. Your stuffed animals have like names and backstories. Like you're just living a way more creative existence. But every kid is like that, which means every person is inherently creative. There's also a quote, I can't remember what the guy's name is. It was like from a podcast or something. But he basically was saying, if you aren't failing, you haven't even tried. Because it's like what you said, you self-censor yourself to such an extent that there's so many things you won't do. But it's like failure doesn't mean you're bad. It just means you're not there yet.
Or you could even say failure doesn't even mean it's bad, in that the rest of the world just might not be caught up yet. Think of how many of these artists wrote an epic or painted a masterpiece that was not accepted during their own lifetime, or even decades after their life even ended. And then somehow this random book that nobody read at the time is blowing up and everybody's reading it and they're making movies about it. No, have you read Lord of the Rings and da 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 da? One thing you mentioned earlier that I liked was the idea of being a more creative existence, and how you as a kid, everything is new to you. So there's a bit of novelty that you lose. Going to the DMV for the first time, you've never been there. Going to Costco, it's like, oh, what's this giant warehouse? And there's a cold room, and oh, you can go behind the counter and peek and do all this stuff. You have a sense of wonder. Whereas once you've seen it 100 times, you're just kind of eyes glazed over. Would you say that historically, which you know I love doing, like our ancestors going back to the caveman days, do you not think they had a more creative existence?
I mean, I don't know really if people were more creative back in the day. It seems to me that people became less creative with industrialization specifically. But I think you could even, for the precursor to that, like, I don't know what you call it, but just like agriculturalization, or just like having to do industrial farming and stuff like that, because you're no longer just hunting and gathering for a smaller group. Now you're doing it for a larger group. Just leads to more and more labor. And when you have more labor that you have to do and more responsibilities, you can't be as creative. That's just sort of the reality of it.
I think you're looking at it differently though, because I'm saying you can be creative while doing the labor. So back in the day, your work would probably be more creative, because it'd be like, this tree fell down and is blocking the road. I can't call a number. I have to figure out how to move the tree, or chop it up into bits, or push it out of the way, or go around the tree. Now you can just buy, instead of carving a pumpkin yourself with like some random knife you have on hand, you buy a special kit and it has a little scooper. Even back, you would have to scrounge through the cabinets and find the tools for yourself, or jerry rig something up. But now you can buy a hyper specific thing that does the very hyper specific task that you're trying to do. And you would have to jerry rig stuff on your own because there wasn't a part you could just buy and get the next day.
That's an interesting point because my mom is like the queen of jerry rigging stuff. Like she can figure anything out using whatever is available on hand. It's like super impressive because like growing up on the farm and stuff, you just don't have access to what you would have access to in a city, for example. So you have to make do.
Maybe what we're getting at is it's automated. So when you hear the word automated, that means it's not creative. Because if it's automated, it's just a systematic process. If A, then B, then C, then D. If it's automated, there's no thinking involved. So to be manual now, think of, oh, this is a handmade leather bag or hand sewn shoes. That's the selling point because somebody actually did it instead of a machine just mass producing it. A person made that with their own time. So that's why it's more special. Somebody crafted it.
So this quote is relevant. This is from Orson Welles. The enemy of art is the absence of limitations. But if you think about it, even in the tree example, it's like, oh, there's a tree that fell. It's blocking my way. How am I going to get past it? These are my limitations. This is what I'm working with. Now I have to come up. That's like experimentation, basically. Creative thinking.
And problem solving, which now you still think of that. People talk about it in a corporate work environment. Instead of being creative, are you a good problem solver? Being creative, though, that's the piece you can't automate. A machine and a robot can't do the thing when the automated process breaks because you need the human creativity. And there is something magical about that. When people are working together on anything as a group, you can do some pretty amazing things, but also you can come up with pretty ingenious ways to solve just silly little things that you run into.
Guillermo del Toro, who we obviously recently spoke about, he was basically saying like all the corporations claim that art is not important and then they try and automate and create art artificially. The corporations are trying to tamp out creativity, not just art, all creativity. Because if you think about why they're getting rid of automation, soon you won't be able to do really anything. You're not supposed to be free thinking. And that's what art is. Oh, no, don't notice that. You're not allowed to. And if you notice it, well, you better be quiet.
I think that's what we're getting at. And I think that's why the world tells you not to be an artist, because to be an artist, again, what are we talking about? Is a magical viewpoint. You're looking at the world around you and thinking, how can I interact with this? How can I change it? That's not what the system wants. But I'm not even talking about the modern world or in any society. People that look around at ways to do things better or that think a little bit outside of the box are never liked because they upset the status quo. And even in a competitive environment, you don't want your competitor to be wily and ambitious. That's bad. Like don't believe that you can compete against me. Just give up, be futile. And that's the creative, the gumption, the chutzpah, whatever that phrase is. In college, I don't know if you remember, but I had to take a class. I needed like some elective, like at the end of graduating, but it had to be some type of business elective. And I took imagination and entrepreneurship. That was the class. And obviously it's a blow off class or whatever. It's easy. You don't really have to do that much. It's an easy A. That's why I took it. And it was senior year and I was taking other classes that were hard. So I was like, I don't care. Just give me an easy class. It ended up being a super interesting class though. Again, imagination. So it was basically about creativity. And I remember being in the class thinking to myself, the professor has the coolest job. He's just talking about creativity and imagination. That's his job? What the heck?
Why can't I do that?
Anyways, he was a priest or a pastor or something. So he was kind of a weird dude, but he was really charismatic. So they were interesting classes and he would just be talking about his life and things that he did or random people he knew that did something amazing. It was a very inspirational class is what I'm saying. And he lived an odd life and was doing cool stuff. And he was obviously good at speaking because he did that. It was an inspirational class. But one of the things that I thought of that's an incredibly relevant tie-in in that class, one of the requirements was you had to keep an idea journal or something is what he called it. And you were supposed to just look around. And then if you come up with a business idea, you'd write it down. Like maybe you could come up with a new shower drain or, oh, my door's leaking. It would be nice if whatever, you could do something that plugs it quickly. The point wasn't the ideas were good. It was to get you thinking about your environment. But I just liked that idea and it kind of stuck. Now moving to magical journaling and then creativity and the morning pages. It's about paying attention is really what it's trying to work on.
You know, when I taught for the first time, this might have been my first class that I taught. I did this exercise, which basically there's this concept in English composition about, it's called eco-composition. It basically compares the classroom to an ecosystem and talks about how every part of the class, from the physical environment to the teacher to each person within the class, like all of that creates different dynamics and an ecosystem. Honestly, it was very fascinating, and I took this activity from eco-composition, and I had all the students basically pick a place that they knew really well, or just like a random place. Like it could even be a bathroom, and just like sit in it and jot down all these notes about the physical description of the place and the sounds and the smells, etc. And then they had to write something up based on that. But like to your point, it's the art of noticing. And when you start noticing something you've seen a lot in a different way, that's also interesting. Because all the details are always there for you to absorb, but sometimes you don't.
I think also that reminds me of monks and stuff when they're like, oh, you don't need to go without. It's all in. Look within, or you have what you need. Just be in the moment. And then you sit there and you're like, well, I am getting really stressed about work and my paper that's due next week. And I have to go to the grocery store and you have to do all this stuff. But then it's like, okay, if I just stop thinking about that though, I'm not on fire. I have some food in my stomach. I'm fine temperature wise. When you set down in your body, you're like, oh, I'm okay. And then you look around. And that's kind of where I think kids are when you're young. And that's why you ask all these questions where your parents just driving and you're like, what's that? What's that? What's that? Because you've never seen it before, but it's like, it's a fire truck. It's a cement truck. It's like whatever. But to a kid, you notice these things and you care about them because you've not encountered them. But you're also just very present.
But you also ask questions about things that a lot of adults have taken for granted or just accepted as a truth of the world, even though it's not. And kids make that very clear. And I remember asking like weird questions as well, just about... Like I remember asking my dad something like ethically, like how were people able to kill people in war, but you can't kill people under any other circumstance? Like how do you morally get around that? And I remember asking him in a church building as well. And then I remember he didn't have a great response, which makes sense, right? Because it's like, if someone asked me that now, it's like, well, I don't know what I would say. And I was also like a child. So you also have to keep that in mind in terms of how you're going to explain something to someone.
That's the magic of kids though, because yes, you want to sugarcoat it to a kid without, you don't want to be brutal about some things as well. So you kind of try and blunt it, but then it makes you recognize even more how wrong it is when you have to try and like, wait, am I just lying to the kid? But then I'm being lied to as well by society. So then wait a second, it kind of forces you, if you start thinking about it because you got prompted, you now have to think of how you become the messenger for whatever it is. And then you're kind of reevaluating if you agree with what you're saying too.
And that's the ultimate free thinking spirit. And the ultimate goal in my mind is to keep that spirit throughout your whole life, or at least as long as possible, because most people lose it at a certain point.
Something else that came up as we're looking at this trivia game in front of us, best of the 2000s, but it reminded me of the generations. So we're talking about creativity and asking questions. And I definitely think there's a connection. If you ask questions, you're being creative. A question is kind of forming something as a problem to solve, or like, oh, why this? Like you're asking because you're thinking of something else already. That's kind of implied. So being a questioner is kind of helping flex your creative muscles. So everybody knows Gen X. Let's say Gen X is like 50s to 60s right now. Actually, yeah, that's probably accurate. 50s and 60s. And then I think millennials are like 20, late, maybe 30s now at the point, which is embarrassing, but
I'm pretty sure we were like one of the last millennials.
Thinking about questioning though, Gen X came before Gen Y. We are Gen Y, James and Amanda, your hosts, your resident alchemist, writer, patroness. We are Gen Y. So it went Gen X, then Gen Y, then Gen Z. But one of the play on words that people said was Gen Y wasn't just the letter Y, it was the word WHY, because we questioned a lot as a generation, which I think is kind of fitting because we were the generation that got the internet for the first time. So you were aware of way more stuff. And so you were asking a lot of questions and you were able to see a lot of change because a lot of change was happening and still is, quite frankly. Is being creative just asking questions, basically?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, and sometimes it's asking a question and in some ways conducting a thought experiment to get to a solution or a better understanding of it. That's why it's interesting because when they teach in school, like, oh, we really value critical thinking, but in many ways they don't. Like societally, we don't really value critical thinking. We value regurgitation of facts, and I'll die on that hill.
The entrenched system doesn't like questioning because then you question the system. Ultimately, that's where you go. If you ask a question, then why? Then it's like, because the rules say so. Why did they get to make the rules? Because we voted for them. But why did I didn't get to vote. I was 16. Whatever. As a kid, you ask these questions, the reasoning starts falling apart. Back in the day, you could eventually just say, because God. So stop asking questions. That was the trump card you could play. But you can't say that anymore because nobody believes in it and the laws aren't really divine.
Yeah, I don't think that can be accurate. I think, and again, usually the parent is just like, because that's the way it is, damn it. And then that's like the end of it. And they're like, you cannot ask me any more questions about this. But that's because, like I said, most adults have they've accepted it on some level. And so they're trying to teach their kid to accept it, at least in a survival way.
I do have a weekly wisdom. It comes from Aaron Copeland, no idea who that is. And they said, inspiration may be a form of super consciousness, or perhaps of subconsciousness. I wouldn't know. But I am sure it is the antithesis of self-consciousness.
I like that.
The fact of it being the antithesis of self-consciousness, I liked, which we were talking about earlier with the censoring of yourself, and you're your own worst enemy.
So don't do that.
Be a creative.
Be an icon. We don't need advice from the artist's way. We only need to look within. So if anything, look within yourself for a quote and not in that book.
Be an actual creative and make your own weekly wisdom. That's our challenge to you.
Yeah, and then message us.
We have an email, and then we'll be able to interact with you, the magical Solanians. What are they going to be called?
Salooners?
Patrons? Sounds too much like the website. They've kind of co-opted that again. See, companies just steal words and then they make their company the word, which is annoying. We'll ponder on that. You could write in, what should we be called as a listener? A magicianer.
A magicianer?
It's a magician practitioner. A magicianer, not a magician. There's a difference.
Okay, come back next week, magicianers.
Peace.